Welcome to the NCO Journal Podcast, where we explore NCO professional development. This is a podcast series where we discuss published articles with authors and provide a forum for the open exchange of ideas, information, and solutions. I'm your host, Staff Sergeant Brandon Cox, Senior Editor for the NCO Journal. Today we discuss the article, The Transition from Soldier to Leader. We are joined with Dr. Larry Golba, one of the co-authors for the article, Chago Zapata, Managing Editor of the NCO Journal, Sergeant First Class Osvaldo Akite, NCOIC of the NCO Journal, and Tony Mena, Senior Editor for the NCO Journal. Thank you all for being here. If I could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So a little bit about myself. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I have a PhD in clinical psychology. My specialization area is in forensic psychology. But really what I thought I was going to do with my life was what we call behavioral threat assessment. So looking at antecedents of targeted violence, and this includes sort of dignitary protection, event protection, sort of stalking cases, those kinds of things. And that's what I did for several years before I came into this job at the U.S. Army Research Institute for the Behavioral and Social Sciences, which I didn't know existed. And right out of high school, I did 7 years of active duty in the Army, and then I got out and kind of did the school thing, which landed me in psychology. And I went down the clinical road, like I said, but did a little bit different side of that, sort of the forensic. I've done therapy, I've done general therapy, I've done acute intensive therapy, I've done all of those kind of things, but my specialization was in targeted violence.
It's interesting that you actually served in the Army. So you're, as an NCO, you were an NCO when you left the Army. Is that correct? Were you a sergeant or staff sergeant?
Just E5 sergeant. So MI back then, and in that MOS in particular, which doesn't exist anymore, 97 Echo. We were also coded not only by MOS but by language. We had a language requirement, so I learned Arabic when I initially came in, and our points were maxed the entire time. So I made E5. I think I'd been in 5 years and it would have been 4 months.
Well, the reason I brought that up though is apparently you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk. So this is interesting. That's a very, because I was like, when I was reading this, like, where do these guys get off, writing about NCOs? But apparently, you're an NCO, so that just brings a different perspective to this whole conversation.
I have some history. We had on this team, one of the authors is also a retired sergeant major. I think I want to say he was in 27, 28 years. And then we had also had the opportunity to bring in an outside SME. Michael Schultz was also a retired command sergeant major as well. So we had some good input from them. And then several of the more academic researchers also have done work with the military and NCOs before. So they at least had some understanding.
Yeah, when I read it, it did have. Thinking about it, and as I was reading it too, I'm looking around here at our soldiers, up at the members of our team, our NCOs, and it did have that NCO flavor to it. It was written by somebody who really did know, what, especially that difficulty, that what we're going to be talking about today, which is the transition from soldier to leader. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk about also really quick is the title. We'll start with that because we actually consider. I know one member of our team wanted to change it from soldier to NCO, but I thought it would be important to just leave it as leader because we may have out there some young specialists or PFCs or whatever who are maybe put in positions of leadership, and I don't think that we should exclude anybody from this type of thing. When it comes to being a leader, you could be an 18-year-old PFC who's tasked with doing something, and the lessons that are included in your article, I think, are something that everybody can take something away from.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and that was intentional. I actually originally the title did include it was soldier to NCO, and I changed it to leader because, again, personal experience, but also reports. This happens currently. I was a team leader and a squad leader as a specialist, and that's certainly not uncommon even today. So like you said, I wanted to make sure those individuals felt included, that this is relevant to them. Ideally, you've got probably E5 team leaders, E6 squad leaders across the board, or there's some variation. Different units are set up a little bit differently, but generally that's kind of what we're looking at. But we know that's not what typically happens. So again, in order to get the message out widely, I think that was an intentional choice we made.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that kind of hit home.
One of the takeaways that I took away from the article was that you should develop leaders early. Like, we're talking about military careers here, starting at young enlisted soldiers, but I'm even thinking, I think some of the thoughts that were coming through as I was reading the article was, this is why it's so important for kids to be in like team events and team sports or activities that way, because they get that experience of leading or trying to accomplish objectives, score a touchdown, score a goal or something like that. And so that leadership development should start off early.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And that's come out in this research in particular. I guess I should note maybe at the start that this research, particularly the main project that's cited for this article that I did, was really what we called exploratory. So we were really kind of cast a wide net. We didn't get into a lot of depth into a lot of it. So we don't want to draw any really strong conclusions. But I think the things that we present in the article, we've got a pretty firm grounding on, not only from this research, but previous research and kind of related things in other fields, as far as what that, and that's one of the big things you highlight there, is that experience of having leadership and contact with leadership and leading. And that can take any form, really. Ideally, it would be in the Army, like you said, starting early, maybe as a senior PFC, junior specialist, getting some tasks to say, hey, specialists, go take care of XYZ thing, give them a chance to go do it, see how they do, and provide them some feedback, so they can start learning that leadership process. But this can take place outside of the Army, like you said, sports clubs, things like band, any sort of activity where you've got groups of people and there's, some kind of hierarchy where you've got some leadership roles involved, I think can really help. And that's one of the things that I think we don't necessarily, there isn't really a formal screening for that when people come in the Army. You're not going to know those things unless you ask your soldiers. So that's another one of those kind of encouragements to know your soldiers. That's one of the big refrains I hear all the time doing research and talking to NCOs, is they say to be successful, you've got to know your soldiers. And I 100% agree with that. To be a good leader, you've got to know who you're leading. So being able to find out those things from their background, do soldiers have leadership experience in their past or not? And that will help you to maybe direct your limited time as a leader to see who's maybe going to need a little bit more of those developmental opportunities. If you've got somebody that, hey, was a captain of the football team, or was, a section leader in a marching band, or, something like that, was the captain of the debate club, where they have some of those leadership experiences, kind of test them a little bit, but see maybe they're a little bit farther ahead on the path. Maybe you have somebody that didn't have those things. Maybe they'll need a little bit more of your direct attention to get them up to speed, to get them developed, so they can move up. So I think that's one of those kind of indicators that, like I said, I don't know that we formally necessarily look at a lot of the time, but it did seem to come out in this research and some previous research. And it sounds like maybe in your experience as well, sort of knowing who's got contact with leadership. And I think that falls back on just some basic psychology. We say the best predictor of past behavior is future behavior. So if you've behaved as a leader before, I can have some confidence that you'll be able to do it in the future. But if you haven't, I need to ensure that you get some of those experiences.
I totally can relate with you, sir, because I think you were talking earlier about being an E5 or being a specialist and being a squad leader, and then having maxed out points. I definitely feel that one. I was in 82nd Airborne Division in Bragg, and I was a specialist in aviation and for a long time, and points were at 798, and they put me in a squad leader role, and I actually had 8 other specialists that I was in charge of. So they made me a corporal. Yeah, and it was definitely a learning experience. And I think that not everybody gets that experience. So Army experience isn't the same for everyone. Some people have it a little easier, maybe getting to that next promotion, and some people don't. So some people get more of that leadership experience than others do. So I think that that's what's really important about having articles like this, because it helps bridge some of those gaps between different soldiers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think particularly if you are in those kind of a star MOS or somewhere where people are getting promoted quickly, you sort of know you really got to be on top of that, because they're going to get it in 2 years. A lot of times or shortly thereafter. And that's not a lot of time to be in the Army, to even learn sort of who you are as a soldier, and really get into the Army culture. So then to be put in a leadership role shortly thereafter is pretty challenging. And I think that being mindful of that, like you said, understanding sort of what your MOS and what your field kind of is like, what that environment's like as far as promotion, and so what are all the things you need to know about the Army as a leader and about your job as a leader to be able to then teach other people.
You kind of summarized that pretty well in the article about what's the importance or the need for leaders to become, to develop soldiers early on, because they might be put in situations where they need to get promoted or are promoted quicker than they may have wanted to, and things like that. So I think you do summarize that well in the article. Can you talk about what makes it easier for some soldiers to identify as a leader over others, and why maybe that identity shift becomes difficult for those who don't?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. There's just sort of the basics of the individual. Some people are more. I don't really buy into the born leader thing. I think there's a lot of things you've got to learn to be a good leader. But some people have different, more of the self-confidence, the ability to deal with stress, those kind of things that come with being a leader. Some people have a little bit more of that innately, and earlier in life. I think that's another one. Sort of developmentally, where are you at? Soldiers that tend to come in later, maybe in their mid-20s versus at 18, I think tend to have an easier time because they have some more life experience. They've maybe had a managerial position or had just more time to develop, even just cognitively. We know a lot of those important frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex functions, the executive functioning, decision-making, planning, ability to project the future, those sorts of things really don't fully come online until your mid-20s. So asking somebody who's 20, 21 years old to do a lot of that is going to be a challenge for them, just by their biology hasn't caught up to that yet. Another big one that we highlight in the article, and I think this is probably more important to talk about because this is an actionable thing, is the active preparation, kind of feedback, and those leadership experiences early. I remember, when I had to go back when it was PLDC, I didn't want to go. I was happy doing my job. I liked my MOS, had a good time doing it. But my leaders prepared me. My first squad leader, my first duty station was excellent. Was an excellent role model, and I think that plays out in a lot of what we see today. Soldiers that have those excellent role models that do offer that feedback, coaching, guidance, really tend to have an easier time overall, regardless of those individual factors. I think that NCO interaction and modeling and mentoring really can smooth out that process.
I was thinking that as we've been talking and while I was reading the article, that your article is like a lot of NCO, myself included. I know Sergeant Cox was talking about his experience. I was in the Marines, and I was kind of thrown in a leadership position where I was in charge of NCOs and Marines who were a lot senior to me, and I was kind of in charge, and it's kind of a difficult thing. It was either sink or swim. And what you're offering, what your article here is offering NCOs, is an opportunity not to throw a flotation device or something to the person who's either sinking or swimming, but rather this is a tool for NCOs to give them that flotation device, I guess, before they even dive into the water or are pushed into the water. So I don't know if it's a strange analogy or not, but that's just kind of the thing that was going through my head. That this is an opportunity for NCOs to prepare their soldiers before they're thrown into the deep end, before they have to either sink or swim, so they have the tools to succeed before they actually even get in that position.
Larry, I wanted to get in some of the research that your article is based on. I know that your team administered a role transition survey. I kind of wanted to know if you could tell us about what that was, how you conducted the survey, and then what were some of the results that were surprising to you?
We adapted a couple different measures that had been previously used. One of the folks on our team, Gary Sherman, does a lot of leadership research, and this was a scale that he had developed and used previously. We adapted it for the Army, so we changed some of the questions and changed some of the verbiage, and we added a few things that I had seen in previous work that I'd done that I was interested in to see how they impact that initial role transition. So we inserted some of those in there, but that really came from some previously adapted. We didn't create that out of whole cloth, I guess, is the story. This was an instrument that was used previously, mostly in academic environments, but it is a leadership survey, so it was kind of in that context. I think one of the things that surprised me, it wasn't necessarily from this, particularly from the survey, I guess. One of the surprises was how important the idea of feedback and setting expectations was. That's something that I think maybe a lot of us maybe take for granted. You're in the Army, you've been in the Army for a few years, you're becoming a leader, you maybe sort of know, by that point, you should know what is expected. And I think a lot of those leaders, when they first started out, really said that they didn't have a clear expectation, and some of it was because maybe the message didn't match what they saw from their leaders, or potentially just differences in kind of approach and leadership style sometimes impacted that. And some of it was just a lack of experience in being a leader, just really not feeling like they knew or could act as a leader because they hadn't had a lot of formative experiences as they were developed.
Right. What do you think that your team would have had recommended for that situation? So let's say a soldier comes into the unit, a newbie 5, and they don't feel like they have the authority to take charge or don't exactly know what to do. What kind of recommendations does your team have for that?
I think that has roots in a lot of things. I know I've got it sitting on my desk here right now. This was a few years ago now, but there was a senior leader sentence about re-empowering the NCO Corps. And that's something we've heard is sort of this sense of disempowerment of the NCO, that sort of drift that happens over time sometimes, and sort of reestablishing the NCO role and the importance and sort of power of the NCO within the organization. And this wasn't very common, but I heard it a number of different places. And I think it's probably specific maybe to certain units, but it came up enough that I guess I could feel confident mentioning it, is that a lot of times even these junior leaders didn't feel that they had just kind of the sort of general military authority to correct soldiers if they weren't theirs. They either wouldn't get backed up by their higher, or, if a soldier was doing something, was, behaving in a way that they should on duty, if this junior leader would correct them, the soldier may just ignore them, may blow them off, may even, I heard instances of them, sort of, back talking or cursing out the NCO and you can't tell me what to do in this sort of thing. And I think of one particular situation where the NCO said they went back to their platoon sergeant, first sergeant, and basically got no backing to do that, which I thought was interesting. Now that I only got one side of that story, so I don't necessarily know what was the truth on the ground, but for that NCO, that's what they felt, and that affected how they behaved in the future as far as enforcing standards and really acting in that NCO role.
I had a little anecdote that ties into that, and it also ties into my question. I remember when I was first sort of given a leadership position, and I was like an E3, so not even like a full NCO, which I guess is really great for the title and applies to this. But there were some other E3s, and I was given the sole medical position for this platoon, this recon platoon, and I was asking someone to do a task, a very easy task, and they refused to do it, and they came out with well, you're the same rank as me. Well, back then, it was 2005, that was a while ago. So things were different, which is going to lead into my question. So back then, things were settled, not always using paperwork. Anyway, we had this game called Tap Out or Pass Out, where two people would settle their arguments basically using jujitsu, or I guess McMap, or back then I think the Marine Corps did McMap, yeah. So, which was just a variation of certain jujitsu stuff. Anyway, I put him in a rear naked choke or sleeper hold. So I won the argument, decider, and then from then on, he did whatever I said without complaint, and so did the rest of the platoon because they didn't also want to be involved. Because I wrestled my whole life, and even now I still coach wrestling. But that kind of goes into empowering a young leader. But my question is, since you've been around a while, have you noticed a difference between, I guess, your results now, which is that, these Gen Z soldiers especially want communication, they want these AARs, they want to be explained everything, for good reason. So is there a difference between what we find now and then what there was 10, 15 years ago in a previous, millennial generation?
Yeah, I would say there are, and I think that's something I've really had to learn, sort of coming back into the Army context. So I have a very different, my experience was very different than the last couple decades. Now it's starting to get back to more, the mid 90s was when I came in. So that it was a very different environment. Obviously the world was very different. The Army's mission was very different back then. And it was more like it is now, kind of more garrison time, more training time. It wasn't constant deployment and ramping up and ramping down from those. One of the things that really surprised me across a lot of the research and in talking to soldiers is how little interaction a lot of these soldiers have with even their squad leader. A lot of them report, outside of accountability or formations, they barely see their squad leader. When I was coming up as a junior enlisted soldier, we were in the platoon office. You saw the platoon sergeant, you saw a platoon leader. They'd be out at meetings or doing things a lot of the time, and we'd be out on details or doing the things that we needed to do. But it seems to me, a lot of the soldiers, even the team leaders, a lot of times report they don't see the squad leaders all that much because they're up doing paperwork or going to meetings. So a lot of leadership is done over text or messaging groups and that sort of thing, which was completely foreign. So I've had to sort of learn and sort of reconceptualize, well, how do I study leadership in that environment? There really isn't a lot out there on sort of that digital, sort of distanced leadership. So I think that's a topic we're just trying to get our hands around, because I think it is different. I think just having that physical sort of face-to-face contact with people, those sorts of things, I think can be formative, and just being able to watch and observe your leaders act can be helpful in your development. And it seems a lot of times soldiers get pulled in different directions. There's always details and things. And my recollection may be faulty on this, but it seemed like when we did things, they tried to keep us together as a team, or just, so we could still sort of interact and bond and have some of that time together. Now it sounds like there's a lot of onesie twosie details, and people are sort of off all on their own, and they don't have that time together to, like I said, even just observe or hopefully have more formal or even informal interactions, and kind of that hip pocket training and kind of shade tree counseling, and just kind of those opportunities for development and learning along the way. At least with what I'm getting told. Like I said, I'm not at these units on a daily basis, so I don't see what they see. I just know kind of what the soldiers are saying, and it's fairly consistent that it seems like there's a lot less direct contact with even your first line, second line supervisor than there had been even, 20 years ago, 15, 20 years ago.
If you had one thing to say to a young soldier who's looking to become a leader, or who's either thrust into that position or is looking to become a leader, trying to identify as a leader, what would you say to them?
I would say, number one, I hope you have a good mentor. That's been a common theme across a lot of the research we do, is the value of having someone I can base my identity as a leader and my performance of that leadership role off of. Do I have somebody that showed me sort of what right is, or what right can be? Maybe that person's leadership style isn't mine, but at least I have an idea of where to go with it. I think that's a big thing. And then another thing, And you may be saving this one to reference later, but I think there's an aspect of kind of that self-reflection and honest accounting of where you're at. If you want to be a leader, there's probably a lot of things you're going to want to learn. There's probably a lot of mistakes you're going to make, and you need to be open to that. And hopefully you get feedback, and that's where that mentoring kind of comes in, is being able to act as a leader, get those experiences. We've talked about how important that is. To behave as something is to then become that thing. And that's particularly true for leadership. If I never am in a position where I act like a leader or have to make decisions or be a leader, it's going to be hard for me to just jump in and do it cold. So having those formative experiences along the way, and really taking to heart sort of what you learn about yourself. Maybe you've got a great leader, but you just can't do what they do. That just isn't your personality. You need to find what your style is as a leader and what you're comfortable with, and how you can then get that mission done and be the leader for your soldiers and develop them and take care of them and train them in the way that fits for you, that also meets those mission goals.
What leadership or professional development opportunities are there in the article that you have that maybe NCOs, how can NCOs use your article to develop professional development opportunities like sergeant's time and that kind of thing? Would you be able to maybe take a dive into that?
I mean, I think those kind of 5 key points we sort of put into it, sort of incorporating, you could incorporate those into anything that you do, be it sergeant's time training or hip pocket training, or just going through the conduct, of your daily duties and just, showing your soldiers MOS or just Army things, the small unit tactics, what have you. Any of those kind of 5 key points, I think, can really be built into any of that. So say you're doing some battle drills or something, give that new PFC, make him the team leader, make him the squad leader, and let him run through it. Let him show you what he knows about that, that sort of thing. And then give the feedback, make sure they know what the expectations are for what they need to do. If I'm the senior, I need to communicate expectations. If I'm the new leader, I need to ask questions. If I don't understand, if I'm not sure what it is that I'm expected to do, I need to ask some questions. I can't just guess and just go out there. I don't know that this article is necessarily made, you probably could do a good sergeant's time training out of it, I guess, but I think it's more of gives you kind of an approach to those sorts of activities and just general developmental activities, both as a leader and as an aspiring or a new leader that's still learning. It kind of gives you some targets to go for.
Thank you, Dr. Golba, for the outstanding article and joining us today on the podcast. And a thank you to our audience. Remember to put your knowledge to the page, submit articles, and get published with the NCO Journal. Don't forget to check out our webpage and follow us on social media. We'll catch you next time on the NCO Journal Podcast.